The two guys were furious, but could not do anything. And then suddenly another wave of hot water surged in. It rushed in so abruptly that no one could react in time, and then Yang Lao and Wu Zai were once again pushed back into the water. While underwater, Wu Zai discovered another corpse. After looking at the name tag, he remembered what the uncle on the bus had said about students from an art academy going missing, and this was one of them. After that, he could not resist the current and just fell straight down off the waterfall. Wu Zai then dreamed again of a scene where many ghosts were walking toward a tree. They then stopped and all turned to look at him. Wu Zai was then awakened by the professor from the other group. He also reunited with Yang Lao and asked how long he had been unconscious. Yang Lao said that he had spent half a day searching for Wu Zai, and when he arrived he saw that Wu Zai had already been fished out by this professor. The professor believed that the current at the waterfall was quite chaotic and that it was fortunate they were still safe. But Yang Lao showed hostility toward the professor because he had been traveling with those thugs. Wu Zai wondered why the professor had been separated from that group, and the professor said that his group had encountered the fish earlier and they decided to fend for themselves and split up. He followed the water route and found a passage to here. Yang Lao still believed that the professor was not a good sort, so the professor said that he had simply been approached by that group to ask for help in tracking down the ancient tomb, and because of curiosity he agreed to help. Wu Zai did not want to make things difficult because he had been helped by this person. So now they needed to find a way out of here first, because the fat man had said that to enter the burial chamber they had to follow the chain in the middle of the river, so they needed to find a way to climb back up. Yang Lao did not want to go up and take another hot water bath, so he was somewhat scared, but there was no other way for them to go back up. Then Yang Lao remembered that while falling down here he had noticed a chain right below the waterfall, and they could use it to climb back up. Wu Zai then recalled what the old man in the village had said, that this waterfall was the place connected to the gate of hell. But in fact that was just a misunderstanding of the true meaning of the phenomenon. But if behind the waterfall there really was a gate leading to hell, then that hell must be the true burial chamber, and the chain under the waterfall was truly the correct path. The three of them then entered the water once more and swam toward the waterfall and dived down. Wu Zai and Yang Lao then saw several whirlpools ahead, and it seemed they could not pass through there and had to find another route. The professor flashed his light to signal the two of them to come to him because there was another passage here as well. While swimming down there, the two of them followed the professor and saw an area connected to a chain. The other end of the chain was tied to a mummy. Wu Zai was then pulled by the water, forcing him to cling to the chain, but that mummy suddenly turned around and opened its eyes, and the strips of bandages began to move toward Wu Zai and wrapped around him. Wu Zai suddenly saw a flash of light, and it immediately severed the bandages and freed him. Then another wave of hot water surged in, so Yang Lao swam over to pull Wu Zai away. The two of them managed to swim over and cling to the chain so they would not be swept far away by the water. And not long after, by following the chain, the two of them managed to enter inside the waterfall. Yang Lao wondered where the professor was and thought he might have run away, but the professor also unexpectedly surfaced. After that they went ashore and went to take a look and saw a bronze gourd. Based on the patterns, the professor knew that this was a sacrificial site of a tribe that worshipped a snake god. But that tribe had disappeared without a trace. Yang Lao then discovered a long flight of steps leading downward, so the group decided to go down and take a look. While walking along the way, Wu Zai asked the professor about the notebook that the fat man was carrying and learned that it contained translations of the things recorded on the Hamatapu of the guide's family. Yang Lao then also wondered how the professor could travel together with that group. So the professor explained that the guide and the fat man were both antique dealers, while the two big guys were professional tomb robbers. They had been able to find this place thanks to the notebook the fat man was holding. But encountering the fish and then scattering was beyond expectations, especially that fat man, who had a very significant background and a strong reputation in the antique world, and since they had risked their lives to come in here. The things below were certainly not ordinary, but Yang Lao still disliked the professor, so he kept shining the light into the professor's face, which eventually caused him to drop the flashlight. But because of that, they discovered that the path ahead was a dead end and below it was so deep that they could not see the bottom. Wu Zai used the flare gun he had looted earlier to illuminate the area ahead, and they then saw that below was a pile of coffins. The professor was frightened and wanted to go back, but Yang Lao and Wu Zai objected because they no longer had a way out anyway, so they decided to move along the stacked coffins to find a way to climb down. When jumping onto one coffin, Yang Lao suddenly saw a shadow dart past. causing the coffins where he was standing to collapse all at once. Fortunately, he managed to hold on, and afterward they all landed safely. The professor came down after them, and they walked around to observe the surroundings, because Wu Zai remembered that earlier he had seen a sunken pit in the middle of this area. They then walked around to check and saw a rather strange skeleton that did not look human but seemed to be pieced together. Suddenly, a coffin behind Yang Lao opened and startled him into running away, causing the other two to run as well without understanding what was happening. But after running for a while, the professor tripped and realized that nothing was chasing them at all. However, he realized that they had returned to the place where they had initially landed. Wu Zai thought that Yang Lao's sense of direction was nonsense and had led them in circles. But the professor believed that there might be some kind of dark sorcery here that caused hallucinations, because he was certain that Yang Lao had been walking straight the entire time. And moreover, the arrangement of these coffins was not ordinary at all. They had been prepared very carefully and meticulously, resembling the battle formations of Zhujiang. All things considered, they could not underestimate the wisdom of the ancients. So Wu Zai decided that he himself would go first, and if the two of them saw anything wrong with his torch, they should shout loudly to let him know. The group then followed Wu Zai. Yang Lao still said that he did not trust the professor, because Zhu Jiang's formations were formations that arranged people. How could they be similar to the arrangement of coffins? He kept arguing with the professor when suddenly a strange sound rang out. That shadow flashed past again behind them, so Wu Zai turned back to shine the torch and check. Unexpectedly, the torch went out and Yang Lao suddenly grabbed onto a coffin and announced that he had caught something suspicious. The three of them held onto it together, and it suddenly burst out of the coffin. But what the three of them encountered was an unusually large rat rather than a mummy. It then ran away and Yang Lao let out a sigh of relief. But Wu Zai then examined the skeletal remains in the coffin that had just been broken and found them to be quite abnormal. The professor also examined them and saw that they seemed to have been casually thrown in rather than properly buried. All of these bones had slash marks from blades, so they must have been the corpses of soldiers from a war. But why would the bodies of soldiers from a few hundred years ago be inside the ruins of a tribe from over 1,000 years ago? They suspected that a battle might once have taken place here, and that the winning side had stuffed all the soldiers' corpses into coffins and then dumped them down here. But Yang Lao did not want to think too much anymore and told Wu Zai to hand over the signal gun. He had earlier picked up some ammunition, so he fired another round to illuminate the area and planned to run while doing so. But as soon as he fired, Yang Lao did not expect his round to explode and scatter sparks around, causing the entire area to catch fire. The rats began to run out and fall into chaos. Only then did Yang Lao confess that he had just fired a round that had gotten wet, which caused the problem, seeing that wherever the rats ran, the fire followed. Wu Zai also realized that there was kerosene on the ground. The group then fled from the area to avoid the flames. While running, Yang Lao rammed into a coffin and ended up carrying a skeleton tangled on his body as he ran. But Wu Zai then noticed that all the rats were running in the same direction, so he called out to the other two to follow the rats to find a way out. They managed to crawl into a cave, and when Yang Lao jumped down as well, he got stuck because of his backpack and the skeleton, letting several burned rats slip inside. After Yang Lao got through, Wu Zai stabbed into the ceiling to collapse it in order to block more rats from entering. The entire tunnel began to collapse, so all three quickly ran and then fell into a sealed chamber, surrounded by stone walls with no hidden mechanisms below. Yang Lao felt that the wall was extremely hot and the rocks had blocked the exit. The professor worried that they would not be able to get out and began leaving last words. But Wu Zai then noticed that the rats from earlier had disappeared somewhere. Immediately afterward, Yang Lao angrily stabbed the wall and discovered water flowing out. So Wu Zai immediately carried over a hammer to break the wall and indeed found a passage behind it. So the three had no choice but to run before the chamber collapsed. All three quickly crawled into a nearby well and slid straight down. But when Wu Zai managed to stop himself, Yang Lao came crashing down, so he kicked him away. The professor also came crashing down and kicked him once more, causing Yang Lao, after regaining consciousness, to complain that he and the professor were probably incompatible, because ever since traveling with him nothing good had happened. The three walked for a while, and the professor suspected that this was a drainage passage, so they might be able to find an exit. But after walking some distance, Yang Lao suddenly jumped down and ran ahead. He found a side passage and told the other two to follow him. When they went down, Yang Lao knew that his guess had been correct when the bronze tree appeared before them. Both the professor and Wu Zai could not believe their eyes. The professor had never seen any metal object that was this enormous. Wu Zai asked the professor whether he knew anything about it, and he said it was his first time seeing such a thing as well. Judging from the rust patterns on the various bronzes on it, it was highly likely that this bronze tree had existed since ancient times. And Wu Zai also could not believe that such ancient knowledge could produce something this astonishing, because in ancient times people usually made a mold first and then cast according to that mold. And the professor did not think that this tree could have been made from just a single mold. Wu Zai then went to look for Yang Lao and found him still overwhelmed with emotion at seeing this thing again. Yang Lao said that for a moment he had the urge to climb the tree. So Wu Zai asked the professor again about the holder of the Hamatapu of this site, because earlier he had heard that this place was an ultimate treasure. So those people must have intended to take the treasure out, but this bronze tree could not be easily removed. So perhaps something valuable was actually on the tree. The professor knew that Wu Zai wanted to climb it and believed this was a bad idea because he felt the tree was somewhat unstable. But Yang Lao immediately rejected that and said that since they had come all this way, if they did not climb up to take a look, then they would be punished by the heavens. Yang Lao then climbed up first and Wu Zai followed after. The three of them then climbed for half a day, but still had not gotten very high. So Wu Zai suggested that they should sit and rest for a while. The professor believed that the tree was at least over 100 meters tall, so it was very likely that they would end up having to sleep on the tree. Fortunately, the tree was still large enough for them to lie down on it. Yang Lao appeared frustrated because they were standing on top of a treasure yet could only think about sleeping. He was also excited and believed that if they reported this thing to the government they would certainly earn great merit. But transporting something like this out would also be a huge problem. Only after climbing higher did the professor notice that around the area containing the bronze tree, there were many chisel marks going downward, meaning someone must have discovered this tree before and tried to dig it out, but was unable to reach its roots. Yang Lao still insisted that they should hurry up and climb higher. He then knocked on the trunk and the sound echoed throughout the bronze tree. Wu Zai pressed his ear against the tree to listen and discovered that something was approaching, so he told everyone to run quickly. The three of them fled and a herd of beasts chased after them. They moved like apes, but had no fur and were wearing masks. They split the group apart and tried to surround and isolate each person. Wu Zai tried to evade them but lost his balance and fell. He was surrounded by the monsters, which forced Yang Lao to come to his rescue. The professor was also being chased by a group and ran toward Wu Zai's position. The three had to flee together again, but halfway through they were all grabbed by the monsters. The professor was pulled down and surrounded. Seeing him being restrained, Wu Zai chose to jump down to save him, while Yang Lao was forced by the situation to keep running forward. He then unexpectedly saw the body of the commander fall down, and the gun in his pocket was still usable. Wu Zai and the professor ran while Yang Lao fired to drive the monsters back. Yang Lao opened a path so the two could reach a higher area, but as they continued running, Wu Zai was grabbed by a monster clinging to him. Yang Lao could not fire, so he handed the gun to Wu Zai. Wu Zai smashed the monster's mask with the gun, and it immediately panicked and fled. The professor realized that they were afraid of light, so Wu Zai told Yang Lao to fire a flare. Yang Lao immediately took out the gun and fired, and the intense light from the flare caused the monsters below to become terrified and flee one after another. The group was temporarily safe, so they went to inspect the commander's body. They thought he had died from falling from a great height, but his body was covered with many wounds, and when Wu Zai touched him his body felt hollow, as if all the blood inside had been drained. Yang Lao believed he had simply bled out from his injuries, but Wu Zai felt it was impossible for blood to be drained so completely, and there were not many blood stains around. The professor then examined the bronze tree and realized that the grooves on it were all filled with coagulated blood, so this tree might have been used for blood sacrifice rituals. Yang Lao did not believe it because that would require sacrificing an enormous number of people. But if the tree truly was used for sacrifice, then they would likely encounter even more bizarre things ahead. The group continued onward, but a heavy silence enveloped all three. Wu Zai told Yang Lao to think carefully before acting, but Yang Lao said he had already thought it through and would still risk his life to climb upward, even after seeing the fate of those who went before, because if they climbed down they would still encounter those monsters. So it was better to climb up and perhaps find an exit. But Wu Zai pointed out that the branches above were becoming thinner and thinner, and if they slipped or were hit by the wind they would fall. Everyone only had one life, so they had to be careful. Yet Yang Lao ignored the advice and continued searching for a way up. As they climbed higher, they suddenly saw several bodies falling down. And while examining them, Yang Lao called Wu Zai and the professor over to see something even more shocking, an entire forest of corpses hanging there. Wu Zai suspected this was exactly the blood sacrifice the professor had mentioned earlier, because the bodies were all dried out and were wearing masks like those monsters, so they were likely from ancient times. But a blood sacrifice on this scale would have been nothing less than a genocidal catastrophe. Wu Zai then remembered that when fighting the monkeys earlier, he had seen some masks moving. The professor picked up a mask to examine it and was about to put it on when Yang Lao knocked it away, saying the professor was about to cause trouble again. Wu Zai then called Yang Lao over and said that in this area they could climb from the tree branches to the cliff on the other side, and he then set up a rope bridge to cross over. The professor felt that this situation looked unsafe and Wu Zai also nearly fell, so Yang Lao seized the chance to blame him again. But at that moment the masks all fell down at once, turned into insects, and moved toward the two of them. Yang Lao thought the professor had caused trouble again, even though he had not done anything. Yang Lao used the gun to deal with some of the insects. Wu Zai was still trying to climb at this time when Yang Lao forced the professor to climb onto the rope, causing the load the rope had to bear to increase. Then the gun ran out of bullets, so Yang Lao could only jump and cling onto the professor, causing the end of the rope on the tree branch side to snap. All three were thrown to the other side, but ended up in a precarious position. Wu Zai managed to grab onto a spot where he could stand and immediately climbed up, while the professor and Yang Lao suddenly discovered a swarm of insects emerging from the cliff wall and starting to pour down toward the two of them. Wu Zai rushed over and quickly realized that these insects were afraid of blood. The professor and Yang Lao were about to lose their footing and were already being clung to by the insects on their bodies and faces to suck blood. But Wu Zai ran over and touched Yang Lao with his hand, causing the insects to release on their own and flee. Just as he saved Yang Lao, the rope suddenly broke and caused the professor to fall straight down. Wu Zai then had to examine Yang Lao's injuries and saw that he had many abrasions. Yang Lao worried that he would not live much longer, but Wu Zai said that these wounds were not enough to kill him, so there was no need to worry and he should just focus on resting. Wu Zai then rested until morning and began to look around the surroundings to find a way out. Unexpectedly, he was held at gunpoint, and the one pointing the gun was the fat man. The man said that the two of them really did have great luck to still be alive up to now. Unfortunately, the professor did not have such good fortune. Wu Zai wanted to know what his intentions were, and the man said that in the business world, there are no permanent enemies or permanent allies. So he proposed cooperation with the two of them. The previous bad things were due to the commander's way of acting, and now that the commander was dead, he did not need to make things difficult for them anymore. But he would not force the two of them to agree to cooperate. He was willing to give them some equipment to return, but with one injured person to take care of, Wu Zai surely would not be able to go far alone. So Wu Zai asked how he wanted to cooperate. The man then told him about the tree. It had once been discovered by the emperor in the 13th year, but the tree seemed to possess sentience. The deeper they dug, the deeper its roots burrowed downward, as if no matter how much they dug, they could never pry its roots out. Continuing the story, the tree had originally been discovered by an official who reported it to the emperor. The emperor then ordered his mute army to bring 3,000 prisoners here to dig the tree up. The prisoners only managed to dig down to the current area, and after that there were no further records. Moreover, in order to welcome the emperor, the mute army built a passageway right above where they were now. Wu Zai said that if he knew things this clearly, then why invite him to cooperate at all? The fat man said that Hamatapu only recorded things in a rough manner, so the details of what they would face were still unknown. Therefore, having more people would still be safer. Next, he talked about the insects Wu Zai had encountered the night before. They invaded by clinging to the human body and controlling the victim's nervous system. They were the cause of the commander's death, and at that time the fat man thought he himself might also die here. But he discovered Wu Zai's group, and even more miraculously, Wu Zai's blood contained a substance that could repel those insects, unicorn blood, which was a mass woven from a vine of the same name. In ancient times, people often used it when fumigating corpses before burial to repel evil influences and demonic insects. Anyone who consumed it would never be bitten by mosquitoes. Its function was no different from insect repellent spray. The two of them then reached the passage built by the mute army for the emperor. From here it could connect to the top of the tree according to the records. The fat man then used a grappling rope and threw it toward a nearby tree branch and let Wu Zai go first. Because he had blood that repelled the insects, Wu Zai had no choice but to swing over first carrying a knife. When he reached the tree branch, he cut some blood from his hand to repel the insects and moved inside. The fat man followed and saw that Wu Zai truly did have precious blood. When moving inside, the fat man suddenly heard a very steady sound coming from within a hollow in the tree, suspected that there was something valuable to gain inside. So he let Wu Zai go first because Wu Zai was thinner, and if he found anything he was to contact him via the walkie-talkie. Wu Zai was still hesitant, but the fat man reasoned that the sooner they finished the sooner they could get Yang Lao out. Thinking about his friend, Wu Zai had no choice but to go first. He crawled deep inside and discovered a room made from tree roots with a coffin in the middle. Wu Zai went down to take a look, and at that moment, the fat man called to ask about the situation. Wu Zai told him about the coffin and suspected it belonged to the person who cast this bronze tree. However, it had already been opened. As soon as the fat man heard that, he asked further questions, but the signal was lost. Wu Zai walked around to try to get reception and then heard crying sounds coming from the walkie-talkie. He quickly brought the walkie-talkie close to the coffin and the sound became clearer. But while he was concentrating, the fat man appeared from behind, startling him and causing him to swing his knife. The fat man thought Wu Zai had turned against him and immediately attacked Wu Zai. He punched Wu Zai, so Wu Zai had to kick him away. Wu Zai tried to explain, but the fat man drew his sword to deal with him, forcing Wu Zai to flee. Wu Zai kept dodging his attacks, but unfortunately tripped over some vines and fell. He quickly cut the vines to free himself, and then struggled up and pushed the fat man into the coffin. The fat man fell straight down into a deep area beneath the coffin. But when Wu Zai went to check, a hand suddenly pulled him down as well. After calming down and observing his surroundings, Wu Zai discovered that the space was covered by a hazy layer of mist. Because he could not see anything around him, he called out to see if the fat man was still there, but received no response. He then examined the walls and saw several murals depicting the process of constructing this bronze tree. Shortly after, several chains appeared as if inviting Wu Zai, so he had no choice but to approach them. As he slowly moved closer, the fat man suddenly rushed out, forcing Wu Zai to cling to a chain to dodge and causing the fat man to fall straight down. The chain Wu Zai was holding was then suddenly lowered rapidly, so he had to switch to another chain to prevent falling further. The fat man had also managed to grab onto a chain and began to accuse Wu Zai of betraying his goodwill. He waited for Wu Zai to respond for a long time, but Wu Zai said nothing. Then Wu Zai told him about hearing the strange sound. But the fat man still blamed him for slashing him with a knife, so Wu Zai had to say it was a misunderstanding. The knife in Wu Zai's hand almost fell and hit the fat man's head, making him angry and prompting him to climb up after Wu Zai. But after hearing the sound of the knife echoing, he realized there was a flat surface below. So he threw a glow stick down. Sure enough, there was something beneath them they could stand on. So he climbed down first. Wu Zai also had no choice but to climb down after him, and when they reached the ground, Wu Zai still appeared wary. The fat man decided to treat the previous incident as a misunderstanding, and both of them each took a step back and let it go. Wu Zai did not expect to see such a huge block of amber, but the fat man told him to look carefully because this was not amber. He had noticed it from above, that this was a corpse cocoon. The fat man said he had been in this line of work for a long time and recognized that this corpse cocoon was not much different from amber. However, the creature inside might still be alive. Many years ago, small fragments of corpse cocoons had been excavated, but no one knew how they were created. Wu Zai remembered that they had once said there was something inside this tree more valuable than the mausoleum of the first emperor. But if it was only this corpse cocoon, then that statement did not seem quite right. The fat man believed that there must be something extremely formidable inside this corpse cocoon. Although the guide did not reveal it, the Hamatapu had confirmed it, so it could not be wrong. Wu Zai then walked around to observe and saw that there seemed to be nothing else left inside the bronze tree. Although the guide liked to boast, for him to be confident to the extent of claiming that once it was found any wish could be granted, and having hidden some things along the way, meant that there was indeed a basis to believe this place truly held something valuable. But Wu Zai instead thought that when the guide talked about coming here, meaning that whatever one wished for would be granted. The key point was not what they obtained inside, but rather an implication that as long as one could make it here in the first place. At that moment, the fat man explained that earlier when he fell into the coffin, he had hidden within the mist to look for a chance to ambush Wu Zai. And at that time he had also seen those chains and thought that there must be something valuable down here. And when he tried to ambush Wu Zai, he misstepped. And because of that, he discovered that there truly was something valuable down here. Wu Zai understood that what he meant was that this bronze tree could grant wishes. But it sounded somewhat illogical to him, so he tried making a wish to find his third uncle. Afterward, he saw several chains appear and beckon him to seek the truth about his third uncle. But at that moment, Wu Zai suddenly realized something. He recalled the clues from the entire journey up to now and stepped forward to question the fat man about where he had bought that outfit, because Wu Zai had noticed something strange about him, mainly where he had taken out that large knife earlier and also the glow stick just now. He then spoke bluntly, saying that the person in front of him was Yang Lao and that there was no fat man here at all. That from the very beginning Yang Lao had deceived him into this affair. Yang Lao no longer pretended and began twisting his body to return to his true form. Yang Lao had always wanted to deceive Wu Zai once, but still ended up being exposed. Yang Lao apologized to Wu Zai, because in truth he did not want to deceive his friend. However, if he had not done so, Wu Zai would never have followed him. Wu Zai wanted to know Yang Lao's intention, and Yang Lao said that Wu Zai would understand soon. But Wu Zai did not bother listening and rushed forward to throw a punch straight at Yang Lao's face. Yang Lao said that it was also because of being forced by the situation that he had deceived Wu Zai. Then he knocked Wu Zai to the ground and wanted Wu Zai to listen to his explanation. Afterward, he showed Wu Zai a photograph. It was a photo of his mother, who had died during the 3 years Yang Lao was in prison. On the second day after being released from prison, Yang Lao excitedly went home to look for his mother. But when he entered the house, the entire place was shrouded in an unusual silence. Yang Lao then saw his mother lying at the sewing table, so he went over to greet her and promised that from now on, he would not go anywhere and would only stay at home with her. But no matter how he called out, she did not wake up. When Yang Lao touched her, his mother immediately fell to the ground, her face already stuck to the sewing table because no one had discovered her for a long time. After burying his mother, Yang Lao lived alone in the empty house, for a time not knowing what to do. He did not dare to sleep and did not dare to eat either, because every time he closed his eyes he would see the image of his mother appear before him. In the end, he suddenly smelled the food his mother used to cook in the kitchen, thinking that he had gone mad and was hallucinating. Yet what he saw was not a hallucination as he had thought. That image haunted him, and not long after, Yang Lao received news from that fellow townsman, who had also encountered the same situation as Yang Lao, and the two of them together researched this bronze tree. Although they did not know its origin, they learned that it was a divine wish-granting tree, and that the ability Yang Lao possessed was bestowed by the divine tree. He tried to recreate the image of his mother as realistically as possible, but the memories from when he first returned always haunted him, making it impossible for him to fully control the ability, because it required the user to discard all distracting thoughts. Otherwise, everything would become worse. Yang Lao became afraid, because every time those terrifying memories surfaced, they grew stronger and gradually erased his memories of his mother from his mind. Therefore, Yang Lao needed Wu Zai, because Wu Zai was the only person who had memories of Yang Lao's mother and also possessed a pure and innocent soul. Yang Lao knew that he was wrong to deceive Wu Zai, but he missed his mother too much. I felt choked up and almost cried when witnessing this, and I believe many people did as well. After hearing the story, Wu Zai agreed to help, and Yang Lao wanted Wu Zai to first try materializing something to practice, because this power could not be activated proactively. It only worked in certain situations. It was a type of passive ability, but Yang Lao had almost mastered it. Therefore, Yang Lao wanted Wu Zai to remember these words and let his mind guide the ability naturally. Yet Wu Zai still did not completely believe Yang Lao's words. Suddenly, the two of them heard a tremor coming from inside the bronze tree. And since Yang Lao had not used his ability at all, it had to have been caused by Wu Zai. Yang Lao asked Wu Zai what he thought when he first saw this bronze tree, and Wu Zai said that he thought it was a path leading down to hell, and as a result the corpse cocoon below began to reveal a gigantic eye. Then a tentacle emerged, and Yang Lao reproached Wu Zai for thinking such nonsense. The tentacle then smashed the corpse cocoon and caused both of them to fall, and Yang Lao managed to grab onto a chain to keep himself suspended in midair. He then controlled the chain to seize Wu Zai and keep him safe. Wu Zai wanted Yang Lao to deal with this thing, but something that is created can only be dealt with by its creator. However, Wu Zai insisted that he had not imagined this thing, so there had to be another person here besides the two of them. Yang Lao then controlled the chains to pull both of them upward, and just as they were about to reach the limit, Yang Lao told Wu Zai to let go and fall straight up into the area above the crown of the bronze tree. But the chains continued to lash about wildly, forcing Yang Lao to run ahead. Yet Wu Zai saw the mural on the wall and began thinking wildly, blocking Yang Lao's path. Afterward, the tentacles surged up and engulfed both of them. The entire bronze tree was then destroyed by the tentacles. But the good news was that both of them were able to run. Yang Lao quickly led Wu Zai to the previous grappling hook and swung away, because the tentacles were growing larger and larger. The two of them then managed to swing onto a wooden pathway. But the creature had now revealed its true form as a gigantic snake rather than tentacles. The snake then targeted both of them directly to attack, forcing them to flee. But they stepped onto a rotten wooden area and fell through several levels in succession. Yang Lao used his gun to shoot, but it had absolutely no effect, leaving them with no choice but to find a cave to hide in. The snake then crawled around the bronze tree to descend and saw the two of them run into the cave, so it slammed its head straight into the cave, causing it to collapse and bury both of them. However, the two of them were lucky because the fallen rocks blocked the snake's pursuit path. Wu Zai asked Yang Lao whether he could conjure something useful, but Yang Lao was in no state of mind calm enough to use his ability in such a situation. The two of them then discovered that the place they were standing on was about to collapse, so they dodged and soon discovered that a passage had opened up. But this passage was blocked by Yang Lao, who did not allow Wu Zai to enter. Wu Zai did not understand Yang Lao's intention, and Yang Lao said that since they did not know what dangers lay inside, they should not rush in and needed to scout first. But Wu Zai did not want to stay here and end up being dealt with by the snake. Suddenly the rocks collapsed again and Yang Lao quickly pushed Wu Zai to a safe spot. Although Wu Zai still had to dodge quite a few falling rocks, at least he was safe. While Yang Lao had his path blocked by the pile of rocks and was separated from Wu Zai. Yang Lao told Wu Zai to stay where he was and not go anywhere while waiting for him to come over. The snake also stopped ramming the cave, so for the time being they did not have to worry about being crushed by rocks. Yang Lao then tried to call out to Wu Zai, but Wu Zai did not respond. Yet after being called repeatedly, Wu Zai told Yang Lao that the space inside was quite small, so he could not go very far anyway. But just as Yang Lao told him to wait and not wander around, Wu Zai proceeded to move forward anyway. He saw a crevice with light underneath and decided not to wait for Yang Lao and went ahead on his own. After squeezing through the crevice, he discovered that there was someone lying inside, dressed quite similarly to Yang Lao. But when Wu Zai went to take a closer look, it was already a dried corpse. Judging from the equipment, this corpse had also once been a tomb raider. And among the items there was a diary that recorded that the person lying there did not know how long he had been trapped inside, and could no longer tell whether everything was a dream or reality. When his group set out there were 18 people, but in the end only he remained. Along the way they had advanced deep into the mountains by following ancient trees. And then they found a tree hollow that led deep into the earth. It was so deep that the bottom could not be seen, and only after entering did they realize how dangerous this place was. And despite fighting with all their might, the number of survivors afterward was reduced to only 6. After that, they returned once more and went deeper downward. And when they reached the bottom they discovered this gigantic bronze tree, its scale far beyond their imagination. They then followed that wooden path to descend further. Wu Zai realized that this group had skipped the altar at the top of the tree and instead went downward. But the area below was already flooded, so they had to use their backpacks as floats to swim on the water. However, at that moment, the water suddenly began to recede rapidly. The narrator seized the chance to swim back upstream and managed to cling to a rocky outcrop, while the others were pushed closer to the tree. Afterward, the snake appeared and attacked those who were on the tree. While the narrator hid inside this cave, one person, while struggling, threw a large amount of explosives into the water, resulting in the cave entrance being blocked. No one knew how long passed, and when this man woke up he was already trapped inside this cave. After 7 days his food and drinking water gradually ran out. Thinking that this would be the end, at the moment when he was most helpless, the water inside his bottle suddenly began to flow out. Seeing this, he immediately went to the bottle and drank continuously without stopping. But strangely, the bottle showed no sign of running out of water. Food also suddenly appeared filling his backpack. This situation then occurred many more times as if it were a miracle, yet it always happened when he was at his most distracted. Gradually, he understood that this was not a miracle, but that he himself had obtained a kind of ability that could materialize thoughts. Afterward, he repeatedly tried more ways to use this ability. But the result was continuous failure. Wu Zai realized that if he did not find some way out, his ending would be the same as this corpse, because it was obvious that this person had failed to escape. But afterward, he found the identity documents of this corpse, and the photograph had been damaged, so only the name remained, Jai Ziyang. Wu Zai felt that this name sounded quite familiar. And at that moment Yang Lao arrived. He asked whether Wu Zai was still there, and Wu Zai told Yang Lao about this corpse and asked whether he knew anyone named Jai Ziyang. But as soon as he asked, he realized something was wrong and withdrew his hand. He examined it carefully once more and realized that Yang Lao's birthday matched the one on the identification, and that Jai Ziyang was actually Yang Lao's real name, because it had been so long since he had called him by his full name that he had temporarily forgotten. Earlier, Yang Lao had deliberately stopped him from entering, but he had refused to listen. Some things are better left unknown. Yet Wu Zai wanted to know who the Yang Lao in front of him truly was. But he was still Yang Lao, Wu Zai's friend, the person who had played with him since childhood. Yet Wu Zai had clearly seen that this was the corpse of Yang Lao who had died 3 years ago. That was not wrong. That corpse indeed belonged to Jai Ziyang and had been dead for 3 years. But the Yang Lao standing in front of him was also alive. After thinking it over, he realized that this Yang Lao was likely a materialized copy created by the real Yang Lao before his death. But which one, the corpse or the Yang Lao in front of him, was real? He still could not be certain. Yang Lao advised Wu Zai not to take it to heart, but Wu Zai could not help being wary, because he did not know what consequences that power would bring. Yang Lao claimed that he truly had been in prison for 3 years, that he was the real Yang Lao, and that Wu Zai should just treat the corpse lying there as an unfortunate person who died in an accident. But Wu Zai then realized another thing, that Yang Lao had never entered here and earlier had also tried to stop Wu Zai from coming in. It must have been because Yang Lao realized that he himself was only a copy. Wu Zai wanted to know why Yang Lao died, why his friend's copy had returned, or whether it was actually the copy who had killed the real Yang Lao. Yang Lao did not want to listen and pulled out his gun and fired wildly toward Wu Zai. Wu Zai managed to dodge, but Yang Lao insisted that he himself was the genuine one, and that the one lying there was merely a worthless piece of trash. That losing his life here was only what he deserved. Seeing Wu Zai being so stubborn, Yang Lao reminded Wu Zai of his fear of the dark. Yang Lao then plunged Wu Zai's side into darkness and intended to exploit Wu Zai's fear of the dark to make him unconsciously materialize all kinds of chaotic thoughts in his mind. And Yang Lao did not forget to add words to deepen Wu Zai's imagination even further. Wu Zai then saw Yang Lao's face and had to close his eyes to calm himself down. But his imagination gradually began to materialize, and not long after, when he opened his eyes and Yang Lao shone the light on him, Wu Zai realized that in front of him there was now a second snake. It immediately lunged toward Yang Lao and opened up an escape route for Wu Zai, while the one-eyed snake outside also seemed to sense this and soon after charged over to fight the snake created by Wu Zai. Wu Zai seized the chance to run and then encountered Yang Lao again, who had been crushed by falling rocks. Wu Zai tried to help Yang Lao, but it was futile, and Yang Lao handed his backpack to him. Yang Lao cried with mixed feelings of sorrow and relief, and when Wu Zai took the backpack, Yang Lao passed away. At this time, the two snakes were grappling with each other, causing earth and rocks around them to continuously collapse. Wu Zai was then unfortunately struck when a snake slammed into a rock wall, causing Wu Zai to be knocked down into the water. As he sank, he saw himself being pulled up by the professor. But the one who truly rescued him was the young man with the sword who had saved him many times before. Wu Zai realized that this man had always been with him under the identity of the professor. He said that the snake Wu Zai materialized would not last much longer, so they needed to find a way out as soon as possible. The water here was formed by rain. Because rain would cause floods in the mountains, floodwater would then rush in here, and when the flood receded, this place would be dry again. But they could not wait that long, so the only option was to find another route. Just as he finished speaking, Wu Zai's materialized snake was bitten to death by the one-eyed snake. Its corpse fell into the water, creating huge waves that swept Wu Zai and that man away. The man told Wu Zai to quickly swim under the bronze tree to avoid being noticed by the snake. The two swam over, and Wu Zai suddenly had to dodge the snake's tail. So he dived down and discovered that the corpse of the materialized snake was covered by those masked beetles. They then detached from the masks and swam en masse toward Wu Zai. Wu Zai had to bite his hand to draw blood to drive them away, but they kept circling him, so that man also used his own blood and dived down to pull Wu Zai up. He spread his blood around to completely repel the beetles and then surfaced together with Wu Zai. The two quickly hid beneath the bronze tree and avoided the snake's sight. The man explained that this was a gigantic venomous snake from ancient times. Long ago, a king had used this type of snake to make oil, leading to their extinction. But unexpectedly, one specimen still remained here. Wu Zai believed that there would be an escape route above if the water level rose high enough. But the problem was that they could not stay underwater for too long, so the two had no choice but to climb the tree. However, before Wu Zai could climb up, he was spotted by the snake, which immediately attacked, forcing the man to pull Wu Zai aside to avoid it. He told Wu Zai to go ahead while he held the snake back. The snake then lunged up from beneath the water. The man threw his sword at the snake and then leapt up to grab it and tried to stab the snake's head. But its scales were too hard, making this method ineffective. Wu Zai continued climbing while the man kept restraining the snake. But as Wu Zai climbed, the snake also began slithering around the bronze tree to find a way to attack him. Wu Zai was knocked flying and fell uncontrollably, but he managed to hook his backpack onto a branch to stop himself from slipping further. He then saw the flare gun and remembered that this snake had once been hunted for its oil. So he ran over to the man with the flare gun. Before he could figure out how to fire it, the man helped him dodge an attack, took the gun, and fired it into the snake's mouth. It began to burn and thrash about, causing its body to be pierced by the bronze branches. Its blood flowed along the grooves on the bronze tree and set the entire tree ablaze. While thrashing, the snake opened up a path for Wu Zai and the man. The two swam into it, and Wu Zai quickly grabbed a nearby stone pillar to keep the water from sweeping him away. He noticed bronze relief carvings ahead and examined them, discovering that many images were engraved on them, and he realized that the bronze tree was not used for blood sacrifice, but rather to hunt that gigantic snake species. After that, the snake tried to dive into the water, causing Wu Zai, who was inside, to be pushed away by the current, and he later managed to get outside. But that older brother found him and decided to leave the bronze tree branch to him, telling him not to continue sinking deeper anymore. He had in fact always been by Wu Zai's side, from the moment Wu Zai and Yang Lao were captured, up until the time they fell down, because he had actually already been rescued. And he also stayed beside Wu Zai while Wu Zai was traveling together with the fat man. And the so-called killing blood that Wu Zai had once consumed was actually a piece of scale from that very snake. Not long after, Wu Zai woke up in the hospital, having been in a coma for 3 full days. And when he regained consciousness, someone had already sent him to be hospitalized. The incident on the mountain was treated as a landslide, and the person who found him was a local mountain resident. People only thought it was a mountain forest accident and therefore did not investigate deeply. Wu Zai later wrote down what had happened and sent it to several acquaintances, and an acquaintance of his father in the United States told him information about that bronze tree, saying that it had recently also been discovered in a mine but had already rusted, and it was indeed used to hunt that snake species. That snake was a species that lived deep within rock and earth, and because it lived in a dark environment, its eyes had degenerated and disappeared. And the people of ancient times used blood to lure the snake out and shot it dead in order to refine it into oil lamps. And in ancient times, oil lamps were a light source that could last for a very long time. But Wu Zai still could not know why touching the bronze tree produced that terrifying ability. Wu Zai then returned home and received piles of letters, and while walking into the house and flipping through them, he found one letter with no sender. But upon opening and reading it, he recognized that the sender was Yang Lao. Yes, Yang Lao had created another copy and continued living somewhere out there. Yang Lao apologized for dragging Wu Zai into this matter, even though Wu Zai was the person Yang Lao trusted the most. And Yang Lao also later told Wu Zai about what happened 3 years earlier, the process of which Wu Zai and all of us already knew. But what happened afterward was what truly mattered. Yang Lao had lived inside there for 4 full months, and Wu Zai also understood how dark and lonely that cave was. And although Yang Lao at the time had enough to survive, living like that was no different from already being dead. At that time, Yang Lao had intended to end his own life, but the bronze tree created another copy of Yang Lao, with the memories of both being copied to be exactly the same. And Yang Lao later returned to the cave to check, only to find that the original was screaming and begging for the copy to rescue him. But Yang Lao at that time could not accept that he himself was merely a copy, and therefore regarded his original self as a monster, while the original continuously screamed and threatened that he would make him disappear. So he fled and used explosives to seal the cave entrance. He soon realized that he himself was a copy, but still chose to abandon the original to die, and then broke off a branch of the bronze tree and left that place. Afterward, he fabricated the story about a fellow townsman to deceive Wu Zai, and thus led to everything that followed. However, possessing this ability also came with its price, as Yang Lao's memory gradually deteriorated. But he knew that Wu Zai also had a bit of this ability, so no one knew whether it would affect him or not. At the end of the letter, Yang Lao only thanked Wu Zai and sent him a photograph that he had taken together with his mother, which proved that Yang Lao had achieved his wish of having his mother back, whom he had lost. And Yang Lao also hoped that Wu Zai would take care of himself. And the film ends here.